and welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I was the inspiration for Bram Stoker.
And I'm Gary, and today we're going to review and discuss The Horror of Dracula, which came out in 1958, directed by Terence Fisher. And Terence Fisher, as you might know, is synonymous with Hammer Horror Productions. He directed such films as The Curse of Frankenstein in 1957, Dracula Prince of Darkness in 1966, The Mummy in 1959, The Phantom of the Opera, The Curse of the Werewolf. The list goes on and on. But Terence Fisher was right there at the beginning of horror in colour. And with the first movie, Curse of Frankenstein, really set the studio up to go on to make Dracula. The film also stars Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, and Michael Gough, or Michael Gough. And these are pretty much at the beginnings of their careers before they would go on to become icons of horror. Hammer Horror at its beginning was there for its shock value. It was the introduction into having colour in film, which for the main reason being they could show blood in all its red, gory majesticness. They would just cover the screens in blood, and straight from the opening title of Dracula, they decide to just splash the tomb with blood just for the effect. And apparently, when the film first released, people were sort of sniggering and laughing at the dramatic music and the gothic statues. But apparently, back in 1958, when the blood hit that tomb, audiences shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
They knew that things were about to get real.
I mean, talking about Hammer, 163 films they produced.
In the space of, what,
time.
20 years?
Yeah. And Horror of Dracula was their 65th production. You know, this film company, I put Hammer Horror, Hammer, I put them up there with the people that did the same with the Carry On series, you know, and the people at Pinewood Studios who did James Bond. They were the three main companies back in the 50s and 60s for British cinema. And for me, from a personal point of view, from when I was a kid, BBC One, 11 o'clock at night, you would just have Hammer Horror, Hammer Horror, Hammer Horror, one after the other, and I would spend like 4 hours just watching blood and heaving bosoms in every one of their films. It was absolutely awesome.
Iain, wouldn't you give us the synopsis for Dracula?
Well, the story follows Jonathan Harker, played by John Van Eysen. Harker has gone to Castle Dracula on the pretense that he's going to do the books for Dracula. But Harker's actually there as a vampire killer and is planning on ending Dracula's reign. But Dracula cottons on to this, traps Harker in his tomb, and then disappears to take Harker's wife. Van Helsing turns up, being played by Peter Cushing, and it ultimately comes down to a battle between good and evil, between Dracula and Van Helsing.
So it's obviously inspired by Bram Stoker's novel, but the writers for Hammer decided they needed to change things up a bit.
Yeah.
So instead of Harker going there to help sell Dracula a piece of land in London, he's there as a librarian to do his books. And also Harker, this time, as you've just mentioned, is a vampire hunter. More on that later. But they also changed up a few of the relationships and a few of the characters, where I think Mina and Lucy had now swapped roles.
Yeah.
And now they're engaged to different characters.
Your wife?
No, my fiancée.
You're a very fortunate man, Mr. Harker. May I ask her name?
Lucy. Lucy Homewood.
Charming. Charming.
You're very kind.
In this telling of Dracula, Jonathan Harker is the worst vampire hunter I've seen in any film. He goes there with the knowledge that he's there to stake Dracula. And then when this buxom woman approaches him and is like, "You must save me, you must help me, he's been keeping me prisoner." He's like, "Who has? Huh? Who? Why? I don't believe you." And it's just like, and the other thing is he gets there during the day and he's got the whole day in the castle to go and stake Dracula. And he's like, "I'm just going to wait until nightfall." How bad can it be? And this goes all the way up until after he's been locked in the house, and you get some of the jump scares.
Yeah.
And we're going to bring this up now, that this is where we get first introduced to Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
His majestic appearance at the top of the stairs, the way he seems to just float all the way down the stairs, straight up to the camera
Yeah.
for his introduction.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house. I must apologize for not being here to greet you personally, but I trust that you have found everything you needed.
And Christopher Lee doesn't have that many lines of dialogue for the rest of the film.
No, he doesn't.
As a matter of fact, he only ever talks to Jonathan Harker for the first... He has about 14 lines of dialogue, and then after that, it's just hisses and sort of gnarly facial expressions. So, after Harker is now convinced that Dracula is a vampire, he's decided it's time to go and stake him. So... he gets locked in his room, and then, of course, he breaks out, and it's almost nighttime already.
Yeah.
And he makes his way down, and he finds the two coffins. He's like, oh, there's Dracula. He's my target. Nah, I'm going to go and play with the lady vampire.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, okay, from what I know about vampires, you kill the head vampire, you save everybody. So then he decides to kill the woman. And I'm like, but Dracula's right there. He's completely out. Okay, right, we've got the rest of the film to go, yeah, but...
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense if he staked Dracula there and then.
Yeah,
it would be the bride of Dracula.
But don't give him the notion. Don't give him the tease. Don't leave Dracula right there, because, well, you might as well just stake him now.
Well, I will argue that perhaps, and this is also explored in the many, many Dracula sequels that Hammer would do, is that Dracula has sort of a psychic shield.
Yeah,
and so he can convince people, even while he's asleep, to do his bidding.
Yeah.
And so it's not a surprise that he could force Harker, even in his unconscious state, to go for another target other than him. Or it's the fact that it's his defense, where his minions would attract the would-be killers, so that Dracula could get away each time.
Well, in other Hammer horror movies, you see Lee as Dracula in his coffin, and he's actually lying there with his eyes showing through his eyelids. That was a weird scene.
Well, Christopher Lee would go on to say that he hated wearing the contact lenses in this film.
Yeah.
It left him partially blind after takes, and the fact that when he did have them in, he was totally blind. He couldn't see what he was doing. And it just always reminds me of the contact lenses they used in The Evil Dead.
Yeah. But we're talking proper special effects now. You know, this film has no CGI, no blue screen. You know, so if you're looking for massive loads of special effects, you're not going to find it. The detail, though, I always love, especially in Hammer movies. It's just, you know, like we said, the Gothic detail in the background.
It's the sets.
The sets.
It's the glorious church buildings, the fantastic castles, the interiors of the castles.
Yeah.
It's not like they had to come in and set dress it.
No.
These were real locations. And they take you to another world when you go into them, because it's just not the normal. A lot of Hammer horror films, or Hammer films, were filmed in idyllic sort of Victorian towns.
Yeah.
With destroyed church buildings, lavish forests, and really, really spooky graveyards. And they became the benchmark, or the hallmark, for all of Hammer films.
We then follow, obviously, we follow Harker down into the tomb, and he gets locked in there. And I loved, but at the same time felt a bit weird by this sequence, because he's just staked that vampire, and then he turns around to Dracula's coffin, so he's in shock, and he looks up at the door, and Dracula comes from the outside in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, why didn't you just run, Dracula? Why didn't you just go? No, I'm staying here. And it's just that looming presence of him at the door, and then he just shuts the door behind him, and it fades. And then we are introduced to my boy, Peter Cushing.
Good day, sir.
Good day. May I have a brandy, please?
Certainly, sir.
I love Peter Cushing. Like I said, I watched a lot of Hammer movies, and he was in a lot of them. I absolutely loved him as Grand Moff Tarkin from Star Wars. And he just... he was just such a well-placed actor. He just knew always his lines. He just made you believe what he was saying. So that first sequence where you see him walk into the tavern and he just walks up to the barman and he's just like, "Can I have a drink? You got any food?" I'm just like, gangster. This guy's a gangster here, you know. Don't believe him. He's here to kill vampires and he kills them well.
But why all these garlic flowers? And over the window? And up here? They're not for decoration, are they?
I don't know what you're talking about.
I think you do. And I think you know something about my friend. He came here with a purpose, to help you.
We haven't asked for any help.
You need it all the same. If the investigation that Mr. Harker and I are engaged upon is successful, not only you, but the whole world will benefit.
Peter Cushing does turn up quite late into the film, just, over 20 minutes into the film, and
Yeah.
he is top billing. And unfortunately, he wouldn't reprise the role that often throughout the Dracula films. I think he plays Van Helsing maybe 3 times in total, despite the numerous sequels that it would have. And that was because Peter Cushing went off to play Dr. Frankenstein in all of the Mummy movies. But Peter Cushing is just, he's the perfect hero to go up against Christopher Lee in this film. You believe all of the things that Peter Cushing's character is saying.
Yeah.
As Van Helsing, you believe he is the vampire hunter. He's like, grab the garlic, get the crucifix, get the holy water. You know, he is a trained vampire hunter, and you believe it, and it sort of creates the romantic idea of vampire hunters.
Yeah.
That this is sort of a calling that they have, and you want to go with him on this journey to go and avenge these other deaths.
Yeah, this, like I said, this is the golden age of cinema. This was the
Well,
birthplace of a lot of horror directors
I
getting
would-
their ideas.
I would say that the golden age of horror was the Universal monster movies.
Yeah.
I think Hammer horror was the next wave of horror.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a golden age because it was all in colour. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, 1931, Bela Lugosi playing Dracula, black and white. That I really do enjoy that film, and I enjoy the Frankenstein movies and the Wolfman movies that Universal put out. But the problem I have with them is, much like they do nowadays, is that they were just kind of money-making blockbusters. You know, Bela Lugosi was absolutely brilliantly cast as Dracula, but he was typecast from then on. You know, he was just that guy with the eyes and the voice. And that was it.
The Bela Lugosi Dracula has become one of the most iconic, though. It's the way that he delivers that Transylvanian accent.
Yeah, but that was obviously his natural accent. That's how he was able to deliver it. Lee, though, as Dracula, this set Lee up to play other scary ass roles in the future. You know, we're talking Saruman. You know, we're talking Count Dooku. We're talking Lord Summer Isle. You know, we're talking Frankenstein. We're talking just, you know, he just had a presence. You know, Bela Lugosi was pretty good, but you never shook the fact that he was Dracula.
Yeah.
When you saw Christopher Lee in another movie aside from Dracula, you remembered it was Dracula, but he still scared you.
Yeah.
More.
Now, there's been a lot of actors to actually play the title role of Dracula. We have had, as you've said, Bela Lugosi, Frank Langella,
Yeah.
Gary Oldman, Klaus Kinski, Jack Palance, Luke Evans, Gerald Butler, Leslie Nielsen, Rutger Hauer, Lon Chaney, Udo Kier, John Carradine, and Dominic Purcell, who I've saved for last because he was the absolute worst. But then not also forgetting, even Morgan Freeman went on to play Dracula at some point in his career.
Really? God played Dracula?
God was Dracula.
By candlelight, I soak and sniff carnations in my casket that's creaky and old. I love to take a bath in a casket. In my casket, I can never catch a cold.
After Van Helsing has turned up to Dracula's castle and realised that Jonathan has been turned into a vampire himself, he has to stake him and return to Harker's home and explain to Harker's fiance and brother and sister, or sister-in-law?
Yeah.
Yeah. That obviously Harker has been killed by a vampire. And Michael Gough, who plays Lucy's brother, does not believe it. And in a weird way, I kind of get drawn into that. But I did find that Michael Gough was kind of underacting. He just didn't seem to show any real emotion.
Whatever happened, all I know is that you brought us nothing but grief. First Jonathan, and now Lucy. Whoever you are and whatever your motives, please go and leave us in peace.
A lot of the actors in the film didn't really react the same way you'd expect them to when they're told that vampires exist, when certain characters are dead, or when certain characters are undead and abducting children. It's kind of like they kind of have a blank expression, and it's kind of like it's like an unnatural reaction where you'd think they'd be more frantic about what's going on.
Yeah.
For the most part, I would say that Michael Gough delivers a strong sort of character. He's like, for the majority of the audience, the skeptic as to what's going on, even though we've already visibly seen what's going on. He's the skeptic who's like, don't believe in garlic, don't believe in vampires, who witnesses these things occur and would eventually go on to be Van Helsing's sort of apprentice.
Yeah. I mean, Van Helsing would turn up, and I love the scene where they're just like, oh, can you check on Lucy? Because she's been ill the last couple of nights. And we've already seen that Lucy has, discarded her crucifix and she's laying her neck bare so that Dracula can come in and feast on her. And I just love the scene where Cushing walks in and he's just like, oh, I'm just going to check your pulse. Yeah, just turn your head this way, turn your head. Oh, shit, you got 2 holes inside your neck. And he just has this look on his face where he just wants to turn to you and go, this bitch is a vampire. And I've got to stake her. I got to kill this fucking thing because she is a thrall of Dracula and I got to deal with it. But he doesn't. He just kind of stone face like, okay, you'll get better. Don't you worry. And Lucy's got this look on her face like, and I know you know.
Goodbye, Doctor. I'm sorry you've had a wasted journey. About Jonathan, I mean.
It wasn't wasted, I promise you. Good day, Miss Lucy.
And it brings up to another stupid scene. I wanted to kill the maid after this. I really wanted to kill the maid. Where Van Helsing's like, right, okay, I want garlic all around her room. I want her windows and doors locked each night. And, we need to just keep her safe from Dracula. And Lucy's like, oh, I can't handle the garlic. Oh, I need the windows open. And the maid goes, okay, I'll remove all of it. I'll take all the garlic and I'll open your windows wide. Night, Lucy. Night. I'm just like, you stupid bitch.
Cut to next morning, dead.
It's a build-up. I know it's a build-up, but, I've seen so many vampire movies that to really appreciate this classic, I'm going to use the word, it's a classic. To really appreciate it, you'd have to go back to 1958. You'd have to be sat in the cinema. The lights have all gone down. You've got that booming orchestral music playing over. You've got the splash of blood on Dracula's name, and you're like, oh, what the hell's going on? And obviously, scene from scene, for a first-timer, you'd be sat there like, is Dracula going to win? Is he just going to kill absolutely everything? Or is Van Helsing going to save the day? And you'd be on the edge of your seat for the time. Nowadays, yeah, okay, you're probably, like me, you'd be sitting there going, you stupid maid, you, for God's sake, But, once again, Cushing comes in, basically just lays it down on the line like, I told you that bitch was a vampire. Now we got to keep an eye on her.
Is there no other way? But it's horrible.
Please try and understand. This is not Lucy, the sister you loved. It's only a shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula. To liberate her soul and give it eternal peace, we must destroy that shell for all time.
See, I like the fact that the victims of Dracula, he doesn't kill them over one night. He sort of slowly drains them over time until he turns them into vampires.
Yeah.
So, and I like the sort of slow transformation that they go through where they're kind of under his spell. And so they kind of want to be fed by Dracula, or they want to feed Dracula, and that sort of plays into the overtly sort of sexual overtones of all Dracula films. I mean, sex in film or sex in horror films would become pretty much synonymous after the Hammer and even during the Hammer production,
Yeah.
this film is a little bit more reserved than some
Yeah.
of the others. I mean, there's no nudity,
No.
and there's just the occasional staking.
Yeah, I mean, this one was based solely on Dracula.
Yeah.
He has this power over people, and this is what comes through from the film, especially with Lee's performance, is that even that fight sequence at the beginning, I mean, it wasn't overly violent, but you could just see the savagery on Lee's face, while he's throwing the woman to the side, and then he's throwing Harker to the side, and even though there's no massive special effects in it, I felt like he had superhuman strength. And then later on, those awesome sequences of him just being stood at the window, and like you said, floating into the room, and then just pulling the cloak over him and the girl, and her just giving herself to him. It's just, oh.
I love the scene where Mina's there with Van Helsing.
Yeah.
And they're sort of wondering what's wrong with her because she's super chirpy, she's upbeat, she's got a big smile on her face. And it was because the director told her, just imagine you've had the best sexual encounter of your life the night before with Dracula. Now roll the cameras, cut. That was the perfect scene. She just has this air of, I've just had the best lay of my life with Dracula.
Yeah.
I just love the way that's portrayed and the way that's set up. I think my favourite scene in the film, there are so many memorable scenes in the film, but the one that stood out the most for me was because, if I'm honest, rewatching the film now, I did sort of lose a little bit of interest in the middle.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, I mean, at this point in time, Hammer wasn't really aiming for the big comical notes, which they would usually follow a big dramatic scene with. It's a scene where Arthur and Van Helsing have gone to see an undertaker. And the Undertaker is just this really chirpy guy. I'm just going to imagine that he was absolutely drunk off his ass on brandy. And he starts telling this story of someone else who came to pay his respects, who fell over and died. It's just like, this is not funny.
Perhaps you better let me lead the way. I know these steps, they can be dangerous. We don't want to have an accident, do we? No, we don't. But, an old man came here once to see his dear departed, and he fell down these stairs. It was really quite amusing. He came to pay his last respects, and he remained to share them. Oh, quite amusing, yes.
But that scene, it took me out of my daze that I was slipping into, and from that point right to the end, absolutely hooked, because the film then builds into the epic showdown between Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, which is just, I mean, the actual final encounter between them is only a few minutes long. It's about 5 minutes long, but the whole film built to that moment so flawlessly that even though I was a bit, the special effects weren't great, I was still captivated by the mannerisms and the actions of these characters, of these actors.
The ending was just intense. You got this brilliant fight sequence. Like I said, Dracula's got this super strength. Van Helsing's trying to fight him off. Van Helsing jumps onto the table, runs, grabs the curtain, the sunlight comes in, and you really get it from Lee that he is in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Van Helsing grabs the crucifix candlesticks, shoves Dracula into the sunlight, scream, burn, done. And I was just like, that was just like a stage performance. I wanted to applaud because I really believed that Dracula had been destroyed at that point. Obviously knowing in hindsight that, Dracula was going to come back like 8 or 9 times over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
But that sequence was just like, boom, Van Helsing, vampire killer.
It's also worth talking about the restoration. Recently, the Blu-ray for the film has come out.
Yeah.
And when the film first came out, the scenes towards the end of the film with Dracula sort of decomposing and melting away, a lot of those scenes were cut down or trimmed back because they thought it was too gruesome for modern audiences at the time. But I think it was in Japan or in some other European countries, there were they weren't as strict on the censorship rules, so copies of the film came out there intact.
Yeah.
And obviously back in 2011, the restored version actually put in those gore effects back into the film, which is the version that I recently watched, and it didn't really add that much more. It was really only just a few seconds of extra decomposition, and it is particularly effective.
Yeah.
Watching the skin get pulled away to reveal the skull behind, to then seeing it all just become dust. It does cement for you that Dracula has been ended.
My favourite scenes, they're actually linked. My first favourite scene was Peter Cushing. He's sat alone in a room just listening to an audio recorder talking about how to deal with vampires. And it was just so brilliant because it was just him. You know, you had a butler come in at one point and take a letter and then go back out again. And Cushing just kind of just starts recording his own monologue into the machine. But you compare it to nowadays without all the bells and whistles and, you know, massive, huge paychecks that some actors go for and shitloads of makeup and effects. This was just a guy who'd honed his acting craft and delivers it so brilliantly that while I'm sat there watching him, I'm believing he's Van Helsing. I'm believing what he's telling me I need to note down to take out vampires.
Peter Cushing was very much a method actor.
Yeah.
When he has to, I mean, he played Dr. Frankenstein quite a lot. And when he had to perform brain surgery or perform operations or blood transfusions, he would actually go and approach doctors and get them to explain to him exactly how the operation would work, what the tools would be, and how to carry himself. So he always said that if the audience wouldn't believe what he was doing, then the film wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So he made it his absolute aim and goal to make whatever he was doing be believable in the real world so that it could be believed in the fantasy world. And that's just testament to fantastic actor.
Yeah. And my second scene is straight after Cushing's finished his monologue and says how he has to destroy Dracula. You cut to the close-up of Dracula's face, the lights on the eyes. He stood at Lucy's door, and like I've already said, he just kind of floats into the room. The music is going. You're just tense. You want to run, but you're hypnotized by him. And he just envelops that girl. And yeah, absolutely brilliant performance. I definitely recommend The Horror of Dracula, but I recommend it to vampire fans. You know, if you're expecting massive loads of special effects, you're not going to get it. If you're expecting loads of blood, guts and gore, you're not going to get it. What you're going to get is just brilliant acting from brilliant stars at the start of their career. You know, you'll get drawn into the sets behind them. You know, if you haven't read Bram Stoker's Dracula, this is a good place to start. It's a good way to branch off and watch all the other type of Dracula movies, from Bela Lugosi's 1931 epic to the most recent Dracula Untold. You know, there's just a whole history of Dracula, and this I believe is the spine of it.
Yeah, this film, Dracula, The Horror of Dracula, the first vampire film in full colour, it's iconic. Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing are, like I've said, icons of the genre. There's so many Dracula films.
Yeah.
Choosing which one to watch, it's hard to do. Now, vampire fans like myself, like most of you, I'm going to assume, have seen most of them, or if not all of them. And the Hammer Dracula film, I will say, is one of the best, if not the best Dracula rendition out there, despite the fact that it takes its liberties with the source material, and that there are some things in the film which could be omitted, but it's a testament of the time.
Yeah.
They got the romantic, gothic, idealized countrysides. They got the sets. They got the overt sexual nature.
Yeah.
They got the vampire hunters. It's sexy. It's gory. It's gothic, and it's seductive. And the whole film, even after all these years, will still grip you from start to finish. Definitely go back and have a look at The Horror of Dracula. Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.
Horror, horror.